All right. I want us to go ahead and get started because we only have Judge Leifman for 45 minutes. And he's an incredible speaker. He's a distinguished judge from Miami-Dade. And I asked him, I said, Steve, how do you want me to introduce? He said, keep it short and sweet. He's a rock star. He's the man. Here's Judge Leifman.
So as a judge, I love it when people follow my instructions. Thank you, Jackie.
So rare.
Oh, no contempt for her today. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here, and most important, for your willingness to learn more about the intersection between criminal justice and the mental health system. You all deserve really a lot of recognition. I was here last year, and to see the change in attitude and the changes in the direction of where this state is going is really heartening. And it was an easy response for me to come back. So thank you all. In fact, that first panel was so riveting that I'm not sure there's a lot I can say to add to it, except maybe give you some ideas on what we actually need to do so those horrifying situations never happen again. When I was 17 years old, I was an intern for a state legislator in Miami, Florida. He received a letter from the then editor of the Miami Herald about a young man who was at our local state hospital. And the editor said to the senator that they weren't sure the young man needed to be there. They were concerned about his treatment, and could they please check it out? See, my age corresponds exactly to the deinstitutionalization movement in this country. So being the lowest person on the totem pole in the senator's office as an intern, I was asked to go to see the young man at the state hospital. I grew up in a nice middle-class family. I had never seen anything bad or ugly or horrible before in my life. And I walked into a state hospital that was something out of a horror movie. I found the young man. He was in a bed. He was in all 4-point restraints. He was probably 100 or 150 pounds overweight from the medication they were giving him, presumably Thorazine, which was the only medication back 40 years ago. And you could see he was living in his own hell. Because to make matters worse, he wasn't even psychotic. He was autistic. And this is why we shut down the hospitals. And so while I was there, I guess word got out that there was a representative from a legislator's office, which apparently didn't happen too much. And they asked me if I would please go on a tour of this facility. They took me downstairs, which I remember today as vividly as it was yesterday. And they took me downstairs to what seemed like a dungeon, where I found 7 men lying naked in their own feces while a guard stood there with a hose and he washed them down like animals. And it left an indelible mark on me. It's probably why I do what I do. But when I became a judge about 17 years later, I found the same horror in our jails that I had seen 17 years earlier in that really rotten, horrible hospital. So while the United States is 5% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's inmates. Think about that a minute. As we sit here this afternoon, 1 in 104 adults in the United States are in jail. 1 in 33 adults in the United States are under correctional supervision. Since 1980, the number of people going to jail in the United States has tripled, and their sentences have increased by 166%. And as you drill down deeper, what you're going to find is that most of this is due to untreated mental illness and untreated substance use disorders. In fact, people with mental illnesses in the United States are 9 times more likely to be incarcerated than hospitalized. They are 18 times more likely to find a bed in the criminal justice system than at a state hospital. And annually, we have almost 2 million people a year with serious mental illnesses arrested. And on any given day, there are 550,000 people with serious mental illnesses behind bars and another 900,000 under correctional supervision. 40% of all people with serious mental illnesses in the United States at some point will come into contact with the criminal justice system. This is a shameful American tragedy, and it's one that can and must be reversed. And if you don't have the humanity to be upset about it, you certainly have the pocketbook to be. Our counties are now spending, and I heard that we had some county commissioners here this morning, and I hope they're still here. In total, last year, the counties in the United States spent over $80 billion on incarceration costs. It's gotten so bad that counties are now having to decide, do I build a new jail or a new road? Do I build a new jail or a new hospital? Do I build a new jail or a new school? Every resident in the United States is paying $260 a year to incarcerate people, up from $77 just 30 years ago. And the states are spending another $71 billion on prison costs. So to put that in perspective, HUD's entire housing budget is a fifth of what we spend on incarcerating people. We have our priorities really backwards. And what have the consequences been by having this ineffective community mental health that we shouldn't call system? We've seen homelessness increase, we've seen police injuries increase, we've seen police shootings of people with mental illnesses increase. We've wasted critical tax dollars, and in many ways, we have made mental illness a crime in this country. In my state, the police actually initiate more involuntary hospitalization calls than the total number of arrests for robbery, burglary, and grand theft auto combined. I've been working on this project for just over 17 years, and it has become quite evident to me that if we treated people with primary health issues the way we treated people with psychiatric issues, not only would there be a plethora of civil lawsuits, there would be indictments for gross negligence. What other illness does it become permissible to discharge people in the middle of the night, psychotic, and then punish them when they don't behave the way we want them to behave, when we never gave them the services that they needed to recover to begin with? And I don't know why we're not angrier. Why are we tolerating this? Because it's intolerable. I'm sure many of you have seen that wonderful commercial for Cancer Centers of America. Has anybody seen that commercial? Oh, it's beautiful. This beautiful music comes on, and like, God forbid you get cancer. We are going to take care of every aspect of your illness. Your mental health, your transportation, your housing, your recovery. Like, cancer doesn't look so bad. And then think about what we do for people with mental illnesses. It is the exact opposite. We're going to send you to this under-resourced facility that's got bugs running around, that hasn't been painted in 15 years, and we want you to thank us for sending you there, and we want you to get better. It's not going to work until we begin to fix this system. And it's fixable, because what most people don't understand is, number one, people with mental illnesses are no more dangerous than the general population. Number two, on medication, people with serious mental illnesses are much less dangerous than the general population, so maybe we should put it in the water like fluoride. And three, sadly, they're much more likely to be victims of violent crimes than perpetrators. And better yet, recovery rates for people with mental illnesses are better than heart disease and diabetes. So let's let them get healthy. Let's let them get jobs. Let's let them pay taxes. Let's let them be part of our society. You know, most of our laws, most of our systems were developed when we knew so little about the brain. We know these are illnesses now. It's time to let the system catch up to the science that we know works and the treatments that work. Because if this isn't disturbing enough, let's talk about the fiscal impact. We did a study in Miami not too long ago where we took a list of everybody that had been arrested in Dade County that we knew had a serious mental illness over a 5-year period. And we have this wonderful institution in Tampa, which is kind of a Florida story because Tampa's in West Florida, but it's called the University of South Florida. Go figure. And they have this amazing institution called the Florida Mental Health Institution. And they are one of the only institutions in the United States that have these blended data sets. And they can actually go into a community and tell you who the highest utilizers of both criminal justice and mental health services are in the community. So we sent them the names of thousands of people. And you have to understand, Dade County, for all the problems you have, it's always good to see that it's sometimes greener on your side of the fence. We have the highest percentage of people with serious mental illnesses of any urban area in the United States, 9.1% of my general population. Bless you. That's 177,000 adults and 55,000 children live in my community with very serious mental illnesses. And Commissioner, you'd be happy to know you're not any longer last on the list. We're 51st per capita in mental health funding. We are barely below Puerto Rico. And so our jails had become the largest psychiatric facilities in the state of Florida. So we took this list and we sent it to them, and I'm thinking, okay, we can at least narrow it down to 1,000 or 2,000 people so we can focus our resources on the people that are costing us the most money, that keep recycling the most, that are the most sick, and we can get a bigger bang for the buck. It's okay. We send it, we wait. Finally, a letter arrives, not even an email. I'm all excited. I open it up. I'm like, this is odd. There's only one piece of paper in this envelope. And on this one piece of paper were the names of 97 people, primarily men, primarily diagnosed with a schizoaffective type disorder, primarily co-occurring, and primarily homeless, who over a 5-year period were arrested 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in the Dade County Jail, 13,000 days at a crisis unit or psychiatric hospital, and cost taxpayers in my community $13.7 million. And we got nothing for it. That's the insanity of the system. As the sheriff noted this morning, we're spending the money, we're just spending it in all the wrong places. But it also points to something else, and this is for the legislators. You don't have to revamp the whole system. You just have to make the system smarter and start to target the people that are costing the most amount of money so you can take those dollars and reassess them, readdress them to the front end of the system to keep more people from coming in. It is fixable. And then there's competency restoration. If you want to look for a really right place to save money, look no further than competency restoration. So when you get arrested for a crime in all of our states, because it's constitutionally mandated, and you are incompetent to proceed, you receive an entitlement. One of the only entitlements somebody with mental illness gets in this country. You're entitled to be competent to stand trial so we can put you in jail. And it is expensive as hell. So just to give you an idea, in my state, we spend about 22% of the state's entire adult mental health budget on restoring competency for about 3,000 people at $144 million. Do you know what I could do with $144 million to fix my community mental health system? Now, maybe that would be okay if those 3,000 people had committed murder and needed to go to prison. But for 70% of the people that we spend $144 million on, three things happen to them. They either have the charges dropped and they walk out of the courthouse without any access to treatment, or they get credit for time served and then they walk out of the courthouse without any access to treatment, or they get probation and then they walk out without any access to treatment. You know what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome. Now, it made sense to have restoration when we set up restoration in the late 50s, early 60s, because there were only about 5,000 people nationally in the United States with serious mental illnesses in jail. But we're using the same system when there's no hospitalization and there's 2 million people arrested each year. And because it is a constitutional entitlement, the states have to fund it. Now, you're in a state like my state where taxes is a 4-letter word. So because they have no choice, and the commissioner unfortunately is learning this the hard way through lawsuits, the legislature doesn't just fund the competency restoration system that keeps growing. They take the money from the community mental health system to fund the restoration system, making it harder for people to get access to treatment and making it more likely they'll get arrested, and watch this balloon just grow like crazy. So in my state, while we have a 15-day requirement that once you're found incompetent, you must be moved to a facility for restoration, well, we ran out of beds one day. And in what was one of the most interesting lawsuits, one of our sheriffs teamed up with the public defender in his circuit, and they sued the state of Florida. The commissioner was found in, and I'm not suggesting any ideas here because I love your commissioner. So please, we do not want this to happen. She was found in criminal contempt of court. She was personally fined $80,000. And the judge gave the state a month to fix the problem, which they refused to do. Finally, after lots of appeals and lots of affirmations, keeping the contempt order in place, our legislature had to have an emergency session, and they basically allocated $64 million to rent 300 beds, because that's the insanity of this part of the system, to get rid of the backlog so the commissioner wouldn't go to jail. But when we looked at it, we realized, yeah, this is the problem with the law. You know, we're kind of very rigid and black and white sometimes. We didn't really think, well, maybe there's an alternative. And the alternative is, number one, is what can we do to slow down that flow into the system to begin with so they never need restoration? And then, is there a better way to deal with people that we're spending all this money on with no outcomes, that don't really need restoration? They need community reintegration, because as I mentioned earlier, most of the people that end up in our system aren't charged with serious offenses. So what we realized what we needed to do is shrink the restoration system and focus it on the most dangerous people that might have to go to prison. And then take dollars from that system and apply it to people who aren't really looking at long-term or any prison, and focus on a community reintegration program. It takes us out of any constitutional issue because we're not restoring to try. It reduces the state's budget and takes those very expensive dollars with very poor outcomes and moves them to the front end to get people services. And we convinced the legislature to try a pilot program in Miami that we call Miami-Dade Forensic Alternative System Center. And we have been able to take a third to a half of the people that would have gone to the hospital. We put them at a locked facility locally so they don't get shipped up to North Florida. They get to stay in their own community near their families. And instead of just focusing on restoration, we work on everything they're going to need to reintegrate into the community because that's where they were going anyway. And then, once they become stable, we put them in our diversion program, which I'm going to get to in a minute. The court monitors them for another year, and then we drop the charges. So we don't criminalize their mental illness. It's about a third to a half cheaper than what the state is spending, and the outcomes are 100% better. That's what we need to be doing in this country, and we need to take those billions that we are spending nationally on restoration to move it to the front end of the system to get people care, not a plea. So the answer is not building more competency restoration beds. It's thinking out of the box, developing alternatives to restoration, and getting people treatment for recovery. So what should an effective community mental health system look like? Well, it should actually begin in our schools. This is the other thing I haven't figured out why we do things the way we are doing things. Jimmy mentioned earlier in his presentation, and it was echoed by the doctor and everyone else, the earlier we identify these illnesses and the earlier we treat them, the better outcomes we get. Well, we know that most of these illnesses manifest themselves starting usually 15, 16, 17 years old. We also know that other than genetics, trauma is a major contributor to a serious mental illness. So I'm going to give you a little lecture on trauma because Dr. Feldman didn't do it, and she said I can't, even though I do have a doctorate. It's one of law, but don't bust me for practicing without a license. So you have this little thing in your body called a pituitary gland. Does anybody know what the pituitary, why is a judge talking to me about a pituitary gland after lunch? Does anybody know what the pituitary gland does? Don't raise your hand, Dr. Feldman. Okay, it's part of your warning system. And I want to talk to our law enforcement officers about this who are in the room too, because this is incredibly important to them. So your pituitary gland is your warning system. So if you walked out to a main street out there and you saw a bus coming at you, the pituitary is going to flash a message faster than an Apple computer to your adrenaline system, and your adrenaline is going to release a little chemical called cortisol, which is cortisone. And it's going to shoot up to your brain faster than a nanosecond, and it's going to tell you to get the hell out of the street so you don't get hit by the bus. It's your flight or fight mechanism. The problem is, if you can't get out of the way, if you're an 8-year-old girl being sexually assaulted at home over a long period of time, you get an overdose of cortisol. And a young brain, more difficult than an older brain, gets punished pretty bad, and it permanently alters brain activity. Trauma is not an emotional reaction. It is physiological. It would be just like if you broke your arm. Now, if you broke your arm, you'd run to the doctor, get a cast, and have everybody sign it and say, "Isn't this cool?" If your brain got broken because of a horrible assault, you're going to try to cover it up, hide it, and handle it. And guess what happens? You get the same horrible symptoms as someone that may have a schizoaffective disorder. You may become paranoid. You're going to have night sweats. You're not going to sleep. You're going to be angrier than hell and angry at everybody. And you're going to have the worst case of PTSD you could imagine. So guess what? You're going to go out because you can't tell your mom. She's probably turning a blind eye because the guy's paying the bills at home. You're not going to tell anybody at school because you're embarrassed and you don't want to get your mom in trouble. You try to live with it, so you turn to drugs. And you try to cope with it. And you self-medicate yourself. 92, remember that number, 92% of all women in jails and prisons in the United States with serious mental illnesses were sexually abused as children. They are victims. And now they're getting punished for being a victim when we never identified their trauma or issue when they were in school. So number one is we need to identify early. We need to be screening kids, just like my kid who goes to public school couldn't start school until he went to the doctor and got screened for all kinds of things, except no one looked at his brain. The medical profession has to step up too. They have to start screening our kids in pediatric times for these trauma issues and for potential signs of mental illness. The American Psychiatric Foundation has a wonderful program called Typical or Trouble. It teaches judges how to identify kids showing signs and symptoms of serious mental illness. Get them early, get them treated. Recovery is much easier and much better. That's number one. No, I don't want to finish that because I want to talk about the police. I read a piece recently that said law enforcement officers get 6 to 9 times more cortisol a day than non-law enforcement officers. They are dealing with severe PTSD. My CIT coordinator gets 150 calls a month from police officers for their own personal mental health issues. These are our first responders. They will not call their departments for help. We actually had to set up a separate system of care for them so they would go get help. We need to take care of them. And then they get attacked when something bad goes on and the bunker mentality gets worse. We need to reach out to them. And let me tell you what happens when you do. When I need money from my county commission, I call my CIT coordinator. She calls our guys and ladies in. I'll have 200 officers standing behind me in uniform asking for money for mental health. How cool is that? Our shootings went from 1 a month of someone with serious mental illness to maybe 5 or 6 in 8 or 9 years. Police injuries have stopped. So there's a better way to do this. This is a community problem. It requires a community solution. It's not just about mental health. It's about taking care of our entire community so that we can all live better. We must have immediate available crisis care. Jackie stole one of my lines earlier, but it's okay. We wouldn't wait 3 to 4 weeks to take someone to an emergency room if they had a heart attack or a stroke. Why would we even think about waiting 3 to 4 weeks for someone that's had a heart attack of the brain? And there's damage. There's really good evidence that the longer we take to get someone out of a psychotic episode, the more permanent brain damage there's going to be. So why do we want this person to get sick forever so that they have to be stuck in the government system forever with a terrible life when we know that if we catch it earlier and treat, they can have wonderful lives of recovery like we've heard this morning? We're killing people. You have to have immediate crisis care. We use Medicaid in Florida. We are not an expansion state like Alabama, but we use, I'm not going to comment on that. It makes my heart sore. Because, Florida just is so generous, they prefer to give $55 billion to all the other states. So for those states that have our money, you're welcome. I'll throw Alabama in there too. It probably wasn't $55 billion, but it was a hunk. We need to develop what we call medical homes. I haven't figured out why we cut the head off from the rest of the body yet. It would really, you want to eliminate stigma? Don't have a psychiatrist's office. Have a healthcare office. And when you walk in to go get your primary check, go get your head checked at the same time. It's going to make life a lot easier if we just treat it like another illness. illness. Medical home models. It's the future, and it's where we need to go. We need a relationship between the criminal justice system and the community mental health system, and we need really robust crisis intervention team programs. We need a robust pre-arrest diversion program. Sheriff Cunningham, you deserve great credit for what you're doing here in Montgomery. It's fabulous. Now, I live in a really big community. I have 36 separate police departments, school police, Miami-Dade police, you name it, we got it. It took us a little while. It took the help of my state attorney, who actually impaneled a grand jury to investigate these issues. A lot of prodding and yelling and threats. We now have the largest trained squad in the United States of CIT officers at every single agency. Over 5,600 officers trained. But what you're going to learn is that's probably not enough. So we had to develop a training program for the 9/11 call takers, who also, it turns out, have severe PTSD because they are taking these horrible calls and have no idea whatever happens at the other end. So we've had to do a mental health first aid training for our 9/11 call takers, and we developed a special 16-hour training so when someone calls 911, the 911 call taker starts asking a whole bunch of new questions to see if it is a mental health related call, and they make sure a CIT officer is dispatched to that scene. And so the officer goes in already knowing what they're walking into, so there's no surprises, and everything ends up a lot better than it used to be. Now, we keep data on every single call, both the City of Miami and Miami-Dade Police Department, that would be our Sheriff's Department, makes in their CIT calls. They're the two largest agencies. They probably do about 70% of all of our mental health calls. Between 2010 through 2016, those two agencies combined did 71,628 mental health calls. Pretty amazing. But what's really amazing is that of the 71,628 calls, they only made 138 arrests. Do you know what happened? If you want to really get in favor of your county commission, our arrests went from 118,000 a year in Miami-Dade County to 56,000 this year. We closed one of our main jails. At an actual savings, I don't like to use the word savings because it's really about cost shifting usually, but when you close an actual jail down and there's no bodies in there and there's no pensions you have to pay or rent or food or liability, $12 million a year. It's been closed for 6 years now. My county really likes me. And so when I went to the mayor this year, and I told him I needed $20 million more for the facility we're trying to build, he didn't blink. Because I told him I was being generous. He still owed me probably another 42. My county just gave us $42.1 million, a $45 million building to develop and open one of the first of its kind in the world, a mental health diversion facility for the most acutely ill that keep recycling. A one-stop shop for every essential service that a community needs to get people into recovery and stop that wheel. It'll have crisis care, short-term residential, a day activity run by people with mental illnesses to teach resiliency and reliability and understanding of the illness. It'll have a culinary supportive employment program to teach jobs. It'll have a courtroom so we can process case. It will be a medical home model. There will be primary care, dental care, eye care, and even tattoo removal, because sometimes people in psychosis do silly things with tattoos. It's hard to get a job when it says hell across your forehead. The bids went out 3 weeks ago, and we should begin construction by March 1st or March 15th. And again, it's targeted. It's those 97 people that are costing us the most amount of money, because the rest of my providers do okay providing for the rest of the people that come through our system. But for that small group that's killing the whole system, we needed something more, we needed something better. Now, pre-arrest isn't enough. You also need to develop post-arrest diversion programs. So if you get arrested in Miami-Dade County, I'm not asking you to come down and do this, we have enough. But if you're arrested on a misdemeanor, we've changed the screening at the jail. Sheriff, do you run your jail also? So we changed the screening. It's about 9 questions. It picks up everybody, for the most part, with serious mental illness. And if they are in crisis, within 3 days, they're out of jail. They're transported to a crisis stabilization unit. I put a criminal hold on them so the 72 hours doesn't apply because it's too short. We actually give them 14 days to begin to recover. I have 7 peers that work for me. 4 of them graduated from the program. My team goes over and meets with them. They're all trained in motivational techniques, or their peers. And they offer them an opportunity to come into our diversion program. And most people accept. Because if you accept, you do not get rebooked in jail. You get taken directly from the facility, directly to the courtroom where the peer is waiting for you. My county gave us a car because my peer complained it was taking too long to move people on the public system. So now we have a car, and we have clothes, and we have their medication in courtroom for them, and we do SOAR so we get their benefits by the time they're ready to leave us. And we get them housing, and we drive them to where they're going to be living that night. And guess what happened? Shocking. The recidivism dropped from 70 to 20%. Because that's what happens when you give people care. Worked so well that my state attorney, who was a little, state attorneys, DAs, they're nervous about this stuff, I understand. She allowed us to expand it to our felony cases. So now we do pretty much the same thing. It's not 3 days, it's within a few weeks, however. We get you out, we monitor you, and we usually drop the charges once you do what we need you to do. So we keep the record off you, because guess what happens if you have a record? You can't get a job, you can't get housing. It's really hard to recover with charges on you. The felony diversion program alone has saved my county 68 years in jail beds so far. It's crazy, huh? Recidivism dropped like a rock for that population as well. So you need a misdemeanor diversion, a felony diversion, and you need an alternative to competency restoration. So there's about 10 other items I'm going to zip through real quickly that I think you want to get to. Now, it's taken us 17 years. I don't want you to think you need to open this tomorrow. You just have to start. And it'll build upon itself. It was so encouraging to hear those 2 legislative leaders today talk about putting more money in. The money is only part of it. You need a commitment. You need them to have the heart and brain to understand what this problem is really about and have a vision to help raise the entire community. Nobody wants to be sick. And the other thing that we've discovered is that when people end up in jail with a serious mental illness, yes, part of the reason they don't want to take their medication is a lack of insight, but we've discovered something else that we had not anticipated. They have depression on top of their serious mental illness. They have given up on life. And why wouldn't they? A so-called system that's treated them like trash, that takes them to a jail for treatment, where they get mistreated and re-traumatized again. Why would they want to take their medication? All their relationships have been severed. Their families, in some cases, have had to give up. There's never any insurance to take them to a private provider to begin with. They just give up. And so the other thing that the peers do that is so wonderful, and you talked about peers, is music, because to me they are the secret sauce of our recipe. They help this population reestablish relationships again and re-incentivize them to want to get better. You can't force someone to want to get better. You have to give them a reason to want to get better. And peers do that. So, you need a good intensive case management system for the people that are most sick. You need to start looking outside the box and look at new approaches. Open dialogue, I think, has a lot of potential. It's a program where it sends a team to a first psychotic episode. And instead of rushing to bring the person to a facility, they see if they can work with the person in the house and work with the family in the house and lower the temperature. Assisted outpatient treatment for those that we have not been able to help is really important, but it should be a last resort, not first resort. We have a project in Miami we're working with, we call Lazarus Project. We have psychiatrists treating homeless people with mental illnesses on the street. We go out, we give them their medication, we monitor them, we wait for them to start to get better, and then we bring them in. I already talked about trauma. You need trauma treatment for all of this population. I told you 92% of women, 75% of men who are in jail and prison with serious mental illness also have trauma-related issues. We need meaningful day activities. Sitting around in an ALF watching Dr. Phil is not a meaningful day activity. All right? People need to feel like they're contributing. There's all this wonderful neuroscience that shows us that when you do something you love, it actually helps your brain heal. These are people. Don't think about them as others. They're just us that happen to be sick. What would you want? We need supportive housing. It was discussed earlier. It's a critical component. Supportive employment, peers, SOAR, so that we expedite benefits. We need to also address some of the criminogenic risk factors for this population. We cannot be naive. Some of these folks, even if they didn't have a mental illness, might be in jail because of their criminogenic risk, which means substance abuse issues, meaning growing up in a situation where they unfortunately hang out with other criminals. So you have to have some behavior modification on top of their mental health treatment. And if you can, you need to start looking at some technology that we can create a system that is less fragmented and helps move this population in a more appropriate manner. Because if we don't do it, what's going to happen to you, which is already happening in Florida, because we're only doing this in spots, while our prison population, I know I'm a judge, so I'm buying 2 extra minutes. While our prison population has leveled out, our mental health population is still growing. It's growing so fast in Florida that if we don't fix this, we're going to have to build 10 new prisons over the next 10 years just for the mental health population. It's going to cost my state about $2.5 billion more to build and operate. And guess what? The average stay for someone in prison in my state with mental illness is only 2.5 to 4 years. They're not committing heinous offenses. There's something terribly wrong with a society that's willing to spend more money to incarcerate people than to treat them, when we know it's treatable. Our outcomes are amazing, but they shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Because if you give people treatment, in most cases, they just recover. You know, I love coming to Alabama because, I was a huge fan of Judge Johnson, who wrote the opinion in Wyatt v. Stickney. At one point in Alabama's history, you probably had the makings of the best mental health system in the country. You really did. There's no reason you cannot recapture that vision and that dream. You have the elements, you have the tools. You probably just have to pull out the old case and dust it off and see what was laid out. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I know that you can continue to move forward. Congratulations to Alabama this month. Had quite a month. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. Good luck.
Dr. Leifman sent a text saying, hey, I didn't get the video in, can you show it? So if you've got that queued up, if you can go ahead and start that video, it's about 5 minutes. We want to see that, and then we'll pick up from there.
hands down, breathing out.
You are my God. These days are so.
Gently, they're guided to glide into yoga positions.
And come down like that.
Inmates suffering from mental illnesses every week now immersed in lessons of mindful meditation. Teacher Lawrence Huff urges them to find an inner sanctuary of calm and confidence.
That's it. Yeah, because I see them all as, souls just like me, you. They just had some bad strokes of luck, and so they ended up this way.
It's a part of a most dramatic departure from how mentally ill inmates were once housed and treated on the notorious forgotten floor of the Miami-Dade jail, the 9th floor.
There's one on the floor underneath the bunk and one or two standing around waiting for their turn to sleep.
Inmates holed up, often naked, forced to sleep on the floor in freezing, putrid-smelling cells designed for one.
You can't treat human beings this way.
Inmate after inmate tried to remind us.
The water's not working.
The water's not working. He's drinking sewer water. He's drinking toilet water out of the toilet.
We had stepped into a jail that had morphed into the largest de facto psychiatric ward in the state, with just one psychiatrist on staff who shocked our community and the nation, sharing this.
You would think that in 2006, we would treat people with chronic mental illness in a much better, more humane manner. But unfortunately, we're reverting back to how it was in the 16 and 1700s, which is terrible. It's morally incomprehensible.
Let's go in and take a look. In the 18 months since the forgotten floor was shuttered, a new generation of inmates is now housed in a $2.5 million retrofit of the 4th floor of the Turner Guilford Knight Correctional Center, a literal world away from the nightmare Judge Steve Leifman turned to us to capture.
Your first forgotten floor led to a grand jury report. It helped us, it was an eye-opener for the entire community. It opened a window to what needed to be done.
Do you feel safe in here?
Of course, I'm here by myself.
So what do you see when you walk in there?
Well, number one, there's only one person. There's not 4 or 5 in a cell for one.
Number 2, there's no longer just one psychiatrist.
It's night and day. I mean, you have 13 psychiatrists working on these floors now. People are getting attention. They're not stuck in there, basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In this case, people are actually getting treated. They have therapy classes. They see one-on-one doctors here and therapists. You saw they have an outdoor area. The guy was playing basketball. It's an open space. It doesn't smell. It's not freezing. It's the way it's supposed to be.
Psychiatrist Patricia Hungiera of the Jackson Health Services team.
I see them as patients, no matter where they are. So I see that they're individuals that are suffering from mental illness and that we have to take care of them as a whole. Medical, emotional well-being.
There are automated electronic checks and balances. All meds, feedings, visits by doctors and correctional staff, including suicide watch, are logged and tracked on iPads.
Well, see, the important thing to remember, Michelle, that these individuals can be a member of our family. So we want to make this environment as safe and humane as possible.
Daniel Jr., Interim Director, Miami-Dade Corrections and Rehabilitation.
Sure. What's going on with your case?
In our series of reports, we exposed how on the 9th floor, neither corrections nor medical staff could call out directly to 911 when an inmate suffered a medical emergency. Life and death minutes could be lost in a maze of bureaucratic phone calls. But now,
If I needed to call 911, can I dial out directly?
You can dial 911 directly from any unit within our system.
That's a big difference.
That's a big difference.
You brought it to light. It was beyond a hometown horror. And what you have now is all about possibilities that has become a national model.
Miami-Dade Commissioner Sally Heyman, who following our reports, fueled a campaign for change.
And look at how incredible the change is.
How are you feeling today?
Fixtures have been changed. For the acute mentally ill, no more steel bunk beds from which an inmate like William Weaver could jump from, and did. He ended up a quadriplegic. his father, William Weaver Sr.
Do you think anything has come from what the incident of what your son went through?
Nothing. Nothing's changed. Do I think something could change? I don't know. I don't know. It's time. It's time. Something changed. But I don't know if it ever will.
Mr. Weaver, he says, I don't think it will ever change. And he starts to cry. Things do change. And we closed that 9th floor. Michelle Gillen and CBS 4 have made a remarkable difference, not just in the lives of these individuals, and not just in getting them in a better place that they should be, but for helping change the entire system. You made them human again, and it helped destigmatize the problem.
And on this day, female inmates were all smiles upon receiving new yoga mats donated by South Florida's yoga community. Behind bars, men and women who may live in anonymity, but these days seem quite aware they are not forgotten.